At exactly 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, Gerald Whitmore, owner of the largest pharmaceutical empire in America, was 90 seconds away from signing documents that would destroy him. But a waitress named Lorraine, serving his breakfast, noticed something nobody else did. What she saw would expose a betrayal that reached the highest levels of power. You know that feeling when you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life, and you have no idea? That's exactly where Gerald Whitmore was at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. This man had built a pharmaceutical empire worth $4.2 billion from absolutely nothing, but in 90 seconds he was about to sign documents that would destroy everything: his fortune, his reputation, his freedom, all gone. And the only person who could save him? A waitress named Lorraine who was pouring his coffee. What she noticed in those final moments would expose a betrayal so calculated, so vicious, that it would shake the entire business world. Before I tell you what happened, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now, because I promise you, this story has twists you won't believe. And subscribe, because stories like this, where ordinary people change everything, these are the stories that need to be told. Let me take you back to the beginning. Gerald Whitmore wasn't born into wealth. His father was an immigrant who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Gerald watched his dad break his back for 30 years, and he promised himself he'd build something better. And he did. Over 35 years, he built Whitmore Pharmaceuticals into one of the most respected companies in America, not because he cut corners or crushed competitors, but because he actually cared about doing things right. He made medications affordable. He treated his employees like family. In an industry full of sharks, Gerald was the rare one who still had a conscience. Every Tuesday morning for 20 years, Gerald had the same routine. 9:30 a.m., Morrison's Diner, same booth by the window. It wasn't about the food. It was about staying grounded, remembering where he came from. And that particular Tuesday, he was meeting his business partner, David Brennan. Now, David wasn't just a colleague. This was Gerald's best friend for 30 years. The guy who'd been there since the beginning, who'd helped build the company from a dream into an empire. David was his chief operating officer, the person Gerald trusted more than anyone in the world. They were meeting to finalize the biggest deal of Gerald's life, a merger with a European conglomerate, $6 billion. This was supposed to be Gerald's retirement plan. He'd sell the company, secure his legacy, and finally rest. After 3 decades of 16-hour days, the man had earned it. David was there, and so was Lawrence Kim, Gerald's attorney for 15 years, another person he trusted completely. They had the contracts spread across that diner table, and Gerald was going through them, initialing page after page. Now let me tell you about Lorraine Fletcher. She was 43 years old, a single mother of 2 kids, and she'd been working at Morrison's Diner for 8 years. Lorraine had started an associate degree in accounting years ago, going to night school while working full-time, but she never finished it. Life got in the way. Bills piled up. Her kids needed things. But that accounting training, even incomplete, had taught her something valuable. She learned to spot errors. She learned that numbers tell stories, and when numbers don't add up, something's wrong. Lorraine had served Gerald every Tuesday for years. He wasn't like most wealthy customers. He actually looked at her when she spoke, asked about her kids by name, left generous tips. Once, when her son needed medication they couldn't afford, Gerald quietly paid for it. Didn't make a big deal about it, just did it. So Lorraine liked Gerald. She respected him. That morning, she was refilling his coffee when something caught her eye. Just a glimpse, really, but years of accounting training make you notice patterns. The documents spread across the table, they had page numbers. One stack went from page 1 to 47. Normal, but another stack she saw pages 1 through 43, and then it jumped to 48. That's weird, right? But then she noticed something even stranger. There were pages numbered 44 through 47 in both stacks. Same page numbers, but the text looked different. Her heart started beating faster. This could be nothing. Maybe she was seeing things wrong, but she'd spent years learning to catch discrepancies like this. It's what accountants do. They find the errors that everyone else misses, and this felt like an error, a big one. She stood there with the coffee pot having this internal war. Should she say something? These were important businessmen. Gerald was basically her favorite customer, but she was just a waitress. If she But something in her gut screamed that this was wrong. She remembered Gerald helping her son. She remembered every kind word, every generous tip that helped her keep the lights on. If something was wrong with those documents, if someone was trying to trick him, could she really just stay quiet? She took a deep breath, walked over to the table and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Whitmore. I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I think there might be an error in your paperwork." The reaction was immediate. David Brennan's face turned red. I mean, instantly furious. "Are you kidding me right now?" he snapped. "Who do you think you are, interrupting a private business meeting?" Lawrence, the attorney, tried to wave her off with this condescending smile. "Everything's fine, miss. These are complex legal documents. Perhaps you could just—" But Gerald held up his hand. "Wait," he said. "Let her speak. What did you notice, Lorraine?" And Lorraine, her hands shaking, explained what she'd seen. The duplicate page numbers, the different text on pages that should have been identical. Gerald's expression changed. He pulled both stacks toward him and started comparing them carefully. And as he read, the color drained from his face. Pages 44 through 47 in the first stack contained standard merger terms, everything they'd discussed, everything that was supposed to happen. But pages 44 through 47 in the second stack, the stack he was about to sign, those pages were completely different. They transferred all of Gerald's patents directly to David Brennan personally. Every medication, every formula, 35 years of work, handed over to David. And there was more. Hidden in the legal language was a clause making Gerald personally liable for $800 million in what it called undisclosed company debts. Debts that didn't exist, but that Gerald would now be legally responsible for. Do you understand what this means? If Gerald had signed those documents, he wouldn't have just lost his company. He would have been bankrupted and facing criminal fraud charges for debts he knew nothing about. While David walked away with billions in patents, Gerald would have been destroyed, completely destroyed. Gerald looked up at David, and David's face told him everything. The guilt was written all over it. Lawrence, the attorney, was already edging toward the door. And Gerald realized the horrible truth. His best friend of 30 years, the man he'd trusted with everything, had been planning this betrayal for years. They'd created a fake European conglomerate, fabricated the entire merger, all so they could steal everything and frame Gerald for fraud in the process. Gerald pulled out his phone and called the police. David was frozen, trapped. But then David made a call of his own. Just one quick call, and he smiled. That smile made my blood run cold when I heard about it later. Because here's where this story takes its darkest turn. Within minutes, police arrived at the diner. But they weren't there to arrest David. They were there for Lorraine. Someone had called in an anonymous tip. Lorraine Fletcher, the waitress, had been embezzling money from Morrison's diner for months, and suddenly there was evidence everywhere. The diner's computer system showed altered records. Bank statements appeared showing deposits to Lorraine's account, thousands of dollars she'd supposedly stolen. The diner owner pulled up these files, saw the evidence, and fired her on the spot. While she was still standing there, trying to understand what was happening, the police arrested her. Right there in the diner where she'd worked for 8 years, in front of all the customers, in front of Gerald, they put her in handcuffs. Child Services was called to pick up her kids from school. The local news picked up the story within hours. Waitress accused of theft. Her face was on television. Her neighbors saw it. Her kids' friends saw it. Everyone she knew saw it. And just like that, Lorraine went from hero to criminal. The community turned on her instantly. People she'd known for years crossed the street to avoid her. And Gerald? He tried to help, tried to tell anyone who'd listen that this was a setup, but his own world was falling apart. David had disappeared, vanished completely. Lawrence fled the country. They later found out he'd gone to Argentina, which has no extradition treaty. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. See, David had been smart. He'd spent months planting seeds of doubt about Gerald's mental state. He's been acting strange lately, making erratic decisions. Maybe the stress is getting to him. So when Gerald tried to explain this complex conspiracy, half the board thought he was having a breakdown. The company's stock price started plummeting on rumors of instability. Competitors started circling, ready to pick apart the company piece by piece. 2 weeks later, both Gerald and Lorraine had lost everything. Lorraine's apartment evicted her. She couldn't find work anywhere. Who's going to hire someone accused of embezzlement? She was sleeping on a friend's couch, fighting a custody battle because child services questioned whether she could care for her kids, and Gerald was losing a board vote that would strip him of control of his own company. The empire he'd built over 35 years was being taken from him by people who believed he'd lost his mind. They were both destroyed for doing the right thing. That's the part that haunts me about this story. Lorraine saw something wrong and spoke up. Gerald believed her and tried to stop it. And they both paid the price. But Gerald Whitmore hadn't survived in the pharmaceutical business for 3 decades by giving up. He looked at Lorraine's situation and made a decision. "She saved my life," he told his remaining loyal staff. "I'm going to save hers." He used what resources he had left to hire forensic accountants and private investigators, the best in the business, and he told them to find the truth. It took weeks of digging, but they found it. The evidence against Lorraine, all those bank records and altered files, every single piece of it came from IP addresses that traced back to Lawrence's law office. The forensic timeline proved it was impossible. The so-called embezzlement happened on dates and times when Lorraine was working her second job at a hospital, with dozens of witnesses and time card records to prove it. Security footage from the diner showed Lawrence at the computer after hours, the same computer that later showed the falsified records. The investigators tracked David to Costa Rica. He'd been so arrogant, so sure he'd won, that he'd kept detailed records of everything. Journals describing how they'd planned the scheme for 2 years, how they'd created backup plans to discredit anyone who interfered. Lorraine wasn't even a specific target. She was just unlucky enough to notice what no one else did. David had a whole list of ways to destroy potential witnesses. He thought of everything. Gerald prepared to go public with all of it. He had the evidence, the investigators had built an airtight case, and he was ready to expose David and Lawrence for everything they'd done. Both Lorraine and Gerald were about to be vindicated. Justice was coming. And then Gerald's phone rang. The number was blocked, but he answered. It was David's voice, and David said 7 words that made Gerald's blood freeze. "Check your daughter's social media right now." Gerald's daughter was away at college, 3 states away. He pulled up her Instagram, and his heart stopped. Recent posts showed her daily routine, where she got coffee every morning, her jogging route, her class schedule. Someone had been following her, documenting her movements. And there was a new message in her DMs from an anonymous account. "Tell your father to stop, or we'll make sure you never make it to graduation." This was David's final play. He'd been caught, cornered, but he still had one card to play: threaten Gerald's family. The message was clear. Drop the investigation, let David and Lawrence disappear with whatever money they'd already stolen, or his daughter would be hurt, maybe killed. And David was desperate enough, cornered enough, to actually do it. Gerald sat in his office that night, the evidence spread out in front of him, and realized winning might not be possible. What good is justice if his daughter pays the price? What kind of father risks his child's life for money, even if it's billions of dollars? He called Lorraine to tell her he had to stop the investigation. He was giving up. David had won. But Lorraine, sitting in that borrowed room in her friend's apartment, her whole life destroyed, she remembered something. When David was at the diner that morning before everything exploded, he'd made a comment, just a casual mention about keeping insurance at the storage facility off Route 12. At the time, it meant nothing. But now? Now it meant David had kept evidence somewhere. Probably to blackmail Lawrence if he needed to, or to have leverage if things went wrong. David was the kind of man who trusted no one, not even his accomplices. Lorraine did something crazy. She broke into that storage facility, technically criminal, and she knew it. She documented herself on video doing it just in case. If this went wrong, at least there'd be a record of why she did it. And inside David's storage unit, she found everything. Not just evidence of the pharmaceutical fraud, but evidence of other crimes, blackmail material on business partners, and most importantly, she found David's surveillance system. He'd set up real-time monitoring of multiple people, including Gerald's daughter. The cameras, the feeds, everything was running through this storage unit. Lorraine had an idea, a risky, possibly illegal, definitely crazy idea. She accessed David's own surveillance system and started feeding him false information. She made it look like Gerald's daughter was going to the police despite the threats. Created fake social media posts, manipulated the camera feeds, made it seem like Gerald had called David's bluff and his daughter was about to expose everything. David panicked. He sent a threatening message directly to Gerald's daughter, a detailed, specific threat outlining exactly what he'd do to her if she went to the police. But Lorraine had already contacted the FBI. They were monitoring everything. The moment David sent that message, they traced it, located him, and had Costa Rican authorities arrest him within hours. Lawrence was extradited from Argentina the same week, both of them in custody, facing 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, extortion, and a dozen other charges. The evidence Lorraine found cleared her name completely. Every charge dropped. The local news that had destroyed her reputation was forced to run corrections. Morrison's diner offered her job back. She politely declined. Gerald's board of directors issued a formal apology. The stock price rebounded higher than ever because investors realized the company had almost been stolen by criminals, and the fact that it survived made it stronger. But here's where karma really comes full circle. Gerald didn't just clear Lorraine's name and move on. He created a $50 million foundation called the Lorraine Fletcher Scholarship Fund, specifically for single parents pursuing education. Then he offered Lorraine a position as Director of Ethics at Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, $250,000 a year plus full benefits. Her kids' college education fully funded. Not as charity, but because Gerald meant what he said. She didn't just save my fortune, she reminded me why I built it in the first place. 1 year later, Lorraine and Gerald were back at Morrison's diner. Tuesday morning, same booth, having coffee. But now Lorraine wasn't serving it. She was sitting across from him, telling him about her new business degree classes. She'd gone back to school, finishing what she started years ago. Her kids were thriving, confident, proud of their mother. The waitress who'd replaced Lorraine brought them their coffee, and Gerald tipped her generously, asked about her life, showed her the same respect he'd shown Lorraine years before. And as they left, Lorraine said something to that waitress, something simple but profound. Pay attention to everything. You never know what matters. Because that's the truth, isn't it? Lorraine Fletcher's courage didn't just save a billionaire. It exposed a criminal conspiracy and proved that integrity sees what corruption hides. She wasn't a lawyer or an investigator or some corporate expert. She was a waitress with an incomplete accounting degree who noticed page numbers didn't match. And that observation changed everything. If this story moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of karma and justice. Drop a comment telling me, would you have spoken up like Lorraine did, knowing it might cost you everything? Because that's the real question, isn't it? When doing the right thing could destroy your life, do you still do it? Lorraine did. And in the end, the universe rewarded that courage. Thanks for watching, and remember, your voice matters no matter who you are or what your job title says. Sometimes the smallest voice sees what the powerful miss. That's not just a story, that's the truth.